Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sons of Liberty podcast. My name is Sam Mealy, and Hunter Young is not in studio today. But regardless, we wanted to bring you guys a special episode coming exclusively to you guys here on the Sons of Liberty podcast. We hosted back in June of this year, Chloe Cole, who is a famed detransitioner. She's spoken all across the country, been on Tucker Carlson. She just spoke at Turning Point USA's AmFest in Phoenix, Arizona in December. And she's an incredible person. It has an incredible story. It's very sad, but it's super inspiring. We got to host her for the Teens Against Gender Mutilation rally here on Cape Cod. And it was great success. 300 people, 16 protesters, but who cares because they didn't cause anything. They're just playing cards in the background. We had a great time regardless. And while she was here, I got to interview her. So I wanted to bring you guys that interview right now because I posted it on my personal YouTube channel a bit ago, and I wanted to bring it to our wonderful watchers and listeners here on the Sons of Liberty podcast. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this exclusive interview with the famed detransitioner and someone I have come to call a personal friend, Chloe Cole. Enjoy. Hey everybody, my name is Sam Mealy. I'm with Turning Point USA at Barnstable County here in Massachusetts. And today I'm joined by Chloe Cole for a lovely conversation we're about to have. How are you doing, Chloe?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. So you're from California, and right now we're in New England for those watching online. Are you, how many times have you been to New England? Is this like first time or?
I've been to a few states in the area. I can't really call which ones right now because I've been traveling for the past.
It's not very conservative, so not a lot of reasons to come up here. So
all the more reasons to come up here.
Well, get the word out. Yeah. So why don't you tell us your story? I mean, so you were a detransitioner, former transgender child. For those who don't know Chloe Cole, I mean, she's been on Tucker Carlson, Jordan Peterson, all over the place. So why don't you tell us your story in a Wikipedia page fashion, something like that?
Yeah. So I'm a detransitioner, meaning that I went through a gender transition, including a social transition and a medical transition, and I'm biologically female, but I identified as a male for some time. And after a few years of going through this process, I decided that I didn't want to follow through with it anymore because, well, a big part of it was that, I realized I wanted to have kids one day. And that this is something that would directly interfere with that. And I also had a lot of trauma and other issues in my life that weren't really being addressed during the consultations for my gender dysphoria or the treatment of it. And in the end, I really just wanted to embrace my identity as a woman. And I started the process of transitioning at 12 with a social transition, meaning that I changed my name. I started telling my family and some of my friends at school that I wanted to be referred to as a boy and as their son, their brother, rather than a daughter, a sister, and so on. And at 13 was when I started medical interventions, which were Lupron, which is a puberty suppressant medication. And a month after I was put on that, I was put on testosterone. And at 15, the summer after my sophomore year of high school was when I underwent the double mastectomy and my breasts were removed. And 16 years old, I was 16 when I decided that I should stop transitioning.
Wow. So what was the process like for first, I want to ask about the actual transitioning and then the detransitioning afterwards. But what was the process like, medically speaking? How did the hospital guide you through transition? Did you go to the hospital saying, I want to transition? Or did you go to them and then they said, have you considered transitioning? What was that process like?
Yeah, so after I came out to my mom and dad, they wanted to be supportive of me, but they didn't really know what to do about this because, they never heard any of my older siblings saying any of this. And they saw naturally that it was a mental health issue. and they decided like they wanted to get help from the professionals. And I guess their expectation was that my mental health issues that were causing me to feel this way would have been sorted out, and that after that, there would be a bit of a waiting period, and once I hit 18 years old, then I would be able to make the decision as to whether I'd transition or not. But that's kind of the complete opposite of what happened, actually. At the time, I wouldn't necessarily say that I was being pushed by anybody in particular into transitioning. I was the one pushing for it, really, because I thought that it was the only choice that I had, that was the only treatment that I had for this condition, and that somehow I really was a boy instead of a girl. And I held on really strongly to this belief. And my parents were getting concerned because of this. They didn't really understand why I wanted to do this so badly. And so they turned to my doctors. They asked, like, why does she want to do this so badly? Like, why don't we have another option? Why can't she wait? Why can't we wait until she's an adult and more capable of making a permanent decision like this? Like, what are the odds that she's going to regret this? And these are all pretty reasonable questions.
Yeah.
And they got pretty unreasonable responses back. Like, the doctors told them, well, there's a reason why she's pushing for this so much. She knows exactly what she wants, and this is who she is. And it's your responsibility as her parents to embrace this. If you don't affirm her, then it's very likely that she's going to kill herself. It's more likely that she'll regret going through puberty than she will going through the treatments.
So looking back on that, do you think that when they said it's more likely that if you don't transition, you'll end up committing suicide, was there any basis to that? Was there any statistical evidence, or later did you look back and realize, hey, they actually lied to my parents?
I mean, historically, before the affirmative model of care was in place, most of the time they would just allow the children to be as they are without any intervention, and they would naturally outgrow their gender dysphoria. Anywhere from about like 60 to 90% of the time.
Wow.
And we weren't informed of this. In fact, I mean, I don't recall them ever asking me if I actually was suicidal over this. And I wasn't. I wasn't suicidal until after a few years of transitioning. But I don't think I thought that the outcome of me not transitioning was going to be death. But I wasn't sure of what would happen if I weren't allowed to. It was more like I had like a fear of the unknown.
Yeah, but I mean, you were a kid. Like, you can't blame yourself, you know.
Right.
And going forward, and kind of looking to the future, how would you, as you're kind of an up-and-coming star in this cultural arena, and talking about this issue of transgenderism and sexuality, and helping youth deal with gender dysphoria, or what used to be called gender identity disorder. How do you think going forward you can help young people? When you're older in like 10, 15 years, the kids that are 1, 2, and 3 are going to be your age now, and they're going to be going through the same issues you're going through. Look, like when you're older and counseling younger people, how would you, or maybe counseling parents, like how would you guide a child through the situation you went through?
I mean, I think a big part of the problem is we are now pathologizing the crap out of a natural developmental process. We're making puberty into like some sort of plague almost. We're telling these kids like, oh no, you can't, like, your body is the issue here, and you're not strong enough to be able to deal with these natural changes. And we're telling these patients, these kids and their parents, that they can just opt out of it. They can just take puberty blockers, and then after that, they're completely reversible, so you can just take them right off of it, and their puberty will resume as normal, which isn't true. I mean, once you're on any of these treatments, really, they're not reversible at all. And there's no guarantee that after starting on a medication like Lupron, that puberty will resume as normal or even start back up again, never.
Wow.
But a problem that a lot of these kids have is that, I mean, many of them come from broken homes or they're being bullied at school, and they don't really have much in the way of a community around them. Like, they're not really close to their family, they don't go to church, and a lot of them are addicted to the internet. And to sort of fill in that that community that they lack, and it leads to them entering like little niche rabbit holes like this that kind of feed on the minds of children who are naturally vulnerable.
Yeah, talk about the aspect of the internet playing a role in your original transition, because I remember you in other interviews you talking about how it was less the education system and more use the internet that pushed you to this. Can you talk about that? Yeah, that's true.
In school, and I mean, I graduated high school just last year. Things like sexuality or transgenderism or identity were never ever talked about in my class, ever. I learned about this completely from the internet, and it was my biggest influence in my decision to transition. I mean, I wouldn't have known what transitioning even was were it not for my presence on the internet. And I wasn't really directly interacting with people in the trans community for a long time, until maybe about like midway through my medical transition. But I first discovered it through, I guess, little communities that you could call fandoms, which are like based around series like video games or cartoons or shows or anime.
Okay.
And through a lot of these communities, I noticed that like there were a lot of people who would talk about their personal lives, about their sexuality or their gender identity. And I started to see more and more posts that were specifically oriented around like sexuality or transitioning. And I was around like 11 or 12 at the time when I was first being introduced to this stuff. And it was really interesting to me because I'd never really seen anything like this before. Like, there were all these new terms to describe yourself, all these like colorful flags, and it was all about self-discovery, and it was so seemingly bright and cheery. And also, like, I was at an age where I was starting to naturally question what kind of person I was, what sort of role I was going to fill in the world.
Yeah. It's natural. Everybody goes through that, yeah.
Yeah, so I started to wonder, like, well, at first it was my sexuality. I kind of switched between different labels, like bisexual, pansexual, and the like. And then it felt like it just wasn't enough. Like, it wasn't really applicable to me. And it was kind of like, well, I mean, I don't necessarily feel like I'm a girl. You know, I don't really fit in with my my older sisters or with my female cousins or peers. And I don't really even know what it means to be a girl. Maybe that means that I'm not completely female, or maybe I'm non-binary. And then eventually it just became, there's no way that I'm a girl. Yeah. Like, I think it's clear that I'm actually a boy, and that's why I'm so tomboyish. That's why I get along with the opposite sex more. That's why I feel more attached to my dad and my older brothers, and that's why I play video games and dress like them. And I mean, really, it was all based off of stereotypes. But
interesting.
I mean, as a kid, when you think of a man or a woman, that's really all you think about.
Yeah.
It's not about like genitalia or chromosomes or anything like that.
Anything about a dress versus like a suit or something like that, yeah.
I feel like if I had been raised with like a strict belief system, and if my parents hadn't stopped bringing me to church when I was like 4 or 5, I probably would have had a lot more structure in my life, and I probably would have understood, like, I was made the way that I was for a reason, and that it's okay to be a girl, even if it's not the easiest.
That's interesting, talking about like a worldview. You know, you're saying if I was born in a certain worldview, I may not have gone down these roads.
Yeah.
Now, to the average, I think transgender who is still where you used to be, they might say, well, that's live and let live, that sort of philosophy. You live and let live. Why your parents shouldn't force you what to believe.
Yeah.
Well, now that you're on the other side of it, and you kind of have a more 10,000 foot view, you can kind of like look down and see everything, all the different choices you made or maybe didn't make. How do you think you could respond to someone who says like, oh, parents shouldn't tell their kids what to believe, they should just let them grow up and believe what they want? Like, what do you think you'd say to those people?
I think the live and let live philosophy is kind of selfish. Like, to see somebody suffering and to not give them any guidance, to just let them do as they please for the sake of their freedom and putting that over their well-being, it's pretty dangerous.
And you could say that right there is the role of a parent, is to look past the here and now and see the consequences of your decisions, and then try to help you guide you around those roadblocks.
Right, and children don't really have like a fully formed sense of reality. They can't really differentiate between reality and fantasy, and that's exactly why they need that guidance from an adult. And I mean, my parents did the best with what they could, but my doctors, I mean, it really feels like they took advantage of that part of me. And a lot of these activists and a lot of people within the transgender community in general, they call themselves like atheists or agnostic or even like anti-theists, but this desire to transition, to be the opposite sex, this belief that the reason why you feel so alienated from people of your own sex, or why you feel so wrong in your own body, is really grappling with your lack of a belief system. And it is kind of a religion on its own, I think.
Talk about that. How is transgenderism like its own religion?
I mean, well, for one, the belief in a gender identity, it's kind of similar to the belief in a soul, in that it's like this entity that is a part of you, but it's separate from your body, and yet somehow it still shapes you as a person. And a lot of it is very ideological in nature. Like, a lot of the treatments and the ideas around it in general aren't really based in science at all. Like, they say that the biggest argument in favor of transitioning is that it reduces the rate of suicide from gender dysphoria. Yeah. But, I mean, the studies that say this are conducted very poorly with really poor patient follow-up. Okay. And it doesn't really take into account the fact that a lot of these people, these patients who do present with gender dysphoria, have other psychiatric conditions that are very likely causing this suicidal ideation.
So you talked about how, correct me if I'm wrong, but how after your parents were told that if you don't transition, you would experience suicidal ideation. But in reality, when you did transition, you actually began to experience suicidal ideation. Is that
Yes.
correct? That's interesting to me. I mean, talk about that. Why do you think that is? Did the doctors know that? Do you think it was malicious? Like, that's just so interesting to me, I suppose.
Well, down the line they did. I think part of it was just that I had unresolved psychiatric issues that weren't being treated until about halfway through my transition. And the way that they went about that was just giving me more medication. Like, they started giving me antidepressants. They started putting me on medication for my ADHD diagnosis. And it just kept making me worse. The constant raising of the doses and changing between different medications really made it difficult for me to function daily. And transitioning itself is pretty difficult, especially like navigating socialization. Because I was raised as a girl, I wasn't really aware of how like male socialization worked, and I didn't really have anybody guiding me in throughout that. So I kind of just had to figure it out on my own. And I mean, I was still a biological female. Like, I was on testosterone, and I looked like pretty much any other boy my age, save for the fact that I was a little bit shorter. But I was like 14, 16 years old, so that was pretty normal at the time. But I mean, physically, I still wouldn't be on par with a man. And I was putting myself in male spaces. Like, I was using like the male restroom facilities at school and the locker rooms. And I was scared that somebody might find out that I'm not actually male. And like, I could get like caught being in the bathroom during class time when nobody was around and sexually assaulted or worse. And this is a lot of, this added to a lot of anxiety in my daily life. And it was also just kind of lonely, because at least in my experience, like, while I was being perceived as a guy, I didn't really have as much room to talk about like my personal hardships and what I was going through. And I mean, under the influence of testosterone, it was also a lot harder to, I guess, kind of process emotions like certain negative emotions like sadness and loneliness. And it was a lot harder to cry. And once I was able to cry, like sometimes I could do it for hours at a time, and I would get absolutely no release from it. I'd feel just the same afterward.
Wow. So it's almost like the estrogen in a woman's body is that when you cry, it actually helps release a lot of emotion.
It does.
Yeah.
And I mean, my hormonal profile was also kind of a natural even for like a biological male, because I had ample testosterone, but no estrogen in my body really. Which, I mean, even men have a small amount of estrogen in their body.
Do you think there's any redeemable value to the gender affirming care industry? Because as a whole, or is it rotten to the core?
Well, I think it's evil to be doing this to kids at all. And if I'm being honest, I don't think that transitioning really benefits anyone. Because even if an individual who goes through transition doesn't regret it and they're satisfied with the results, it's still destroying their body. And they will never actually ever be of the opposite sex. These doctors who are performing these surgeries and administering these treatments are lying to patients, and they're not giving them the information that they need.
Is it out of fear? Is it a money incentive? Is it an ideology that's driving this?
I think it's all of those.
Okay.
I mean, transitioning is pretty profitable for the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, the expenses really rack up, because not only are you taking the injections are about once per week to once every other week. The pill you take daily, and there's also other forms of it like the like dermal patch, gel, and such for the hormones. And I mean, you're supposed to be taking these over the course of your entire lifetime.
Wow.
And the complications that result from these, obviously you have to medicate for those as well.
Yeah.
Especially the genital surgeries are just plain barbaric. And they almost always result in some sort of complication. And it's pretty common for patients to have to get like a revision surgery or two or more.
Well, yeah. I mean, from my understanding, like a gender affirming, hysterectomy is, it's a complete removal of the uterus, the fallopian tubes, everything. And we're in Massachusetts. Boston Children's Hospital is the first children's hospital in the nation to have started a gender affirming care clinic for minors, where they're doing gender affirming hysterectomies on minors. And they deny it, but I don't believe them personally. But I mean, they're definitely doing so. They're encouraging social transition. They're saying that kids know and can express their sexuality from birth and from even inside the womb, which is crazy to me.
I've noticed that like a lot of people will say that these treatments are just not happening in children, especially the surgeries, which, I mean,
Living
I've
proof.
been through. But they'll kind of shift the goalposts when you start talking about banning these treatments in children, and which is kind of ironic, because if no kids are supposed to be going under this, then why should we be worried about banning it if it's not happening in the first place?
That's true, yeah.
And then they'll say a lot of time that, well, they'll sometimes do it in rare cases when the doctors deem that it's necessary for their health, whatever the hell that means.
Well, I see a comparison there to the way, just interesting, I guess, like the way abortion used to be advertised. It used in the 90s, it was safe, but safe and rare. Like abortion's like only when you need it. Like I know it doesn't happen a lot. It's like we want to make sure everybody's safe and that it doesn't happen a lot. And now it seems like we're in that stage with gender affirming care. It's like, well, we're only doing it if it needs to. Like it's really not happening at all. But I mean, if it is, then it's only because like they really needed it. And I'm curious, where do you see the industry, the gender affirming care industry, going in the next 10 to 15 years? Do you think it's going to get stronger and worse? Do you think it'll peter out? Like,
I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people are really starting to wake up to this. I don't think the fight is going to last much longer. My estimate is that it's going to be about anywhere between like 2 to 7 years before these treatments are completely banned in children. And then actually, once that's over, the concern for children will shift over to the adult patients who are being affected by this, and the standards of care for those patients will be revised.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't believe in a total ban for medical transition, not in adults. I think that a select few patients who have been through like a rigorous psychological evaluation and have any other conditions like ruled out and treated, and have been properly informed about the risks of these procedures, I think that they should be able to have a choice in whether they go through it or not.
Yeah, well, the difference there is the words rigorous psychological evaluations. They're not being rushed into it. They're given ample time. They're given counseling. And then from there, I mean, they're adults. They can do what they want once they're fully informed. Whereas you were rushed into it. A lot when it comes to it seems to be when it comes to minors, they're rushed into it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why is that a lot of these doctors and activists say that the younger you transition, the better, because the less secondary sex characteristics will pop up, and therefore the less dysphoria they'll experience as an adult. But they don't really acknowledge that it's actually more dangerous to transition as a minor.
You said like I like that you gave like a game plan. You said 2 to 7 years. It'll probably get worse before it gets better. When you give people a game plan, it can really like people on the conservative side, who are generally the people who are agreeing with you and helping you. It really kind of helps them focus in with action points. Like, okay, if it's 2 to 7 years, it's going to get worse before it gets better. We're trying to ban it on children in state by state. I think it's like 18 states so far that have banned this. It really gives them a frame of reference to then move forward and actually, call their representatives and go to town meetings and talk about these issues with their friends at school, at church, in the public square. So talk about what you want to accomplish in this space. Like in the next 2 to 7 years, what do you want to see change? Like what fruit do you want to see blossom from the seeds you're planting right now?
I mean, obviously I want childhood transition to stop completely. It's never okay. Even social transition is pretty detrimental to a kid's health. And I mean, we haven't even fully...
Are you stereotyping people, Chloe? Shame.
I think it's more stereotypical to tell somebody that because they're a man who likes presenting femininely, wearing dresses, or because they're a woman who is masculine and competitive, that they're actually the opposite sex.
Yeah, that is kind of stereotyping. It's weird.
But yeah,
Ironic.
I also
Ironic.
want the standards of care in general for adult and child patients who have gender dysphoria to be revised, so that it's not just a one-size-fits-all model where everybody who has gender dysphoria and wants to transition should. Because not all of them should.
Yeah, no. What do you think are some other alternatives? Because I know you were talking about how there were some other like underlying psychological conditions that weren't treated, and like I keep saying, you were rushed into the transition. So, how do you think? Let's talk about the future. If we're talking legislatively for children, if a child, like let's say in Tennessee, where gender affirming care for kids was just been banned, let's say a child is experiencing gender dysphoria in a public high school in Tennessee. He goes to his teacher, his parents, and he's like, hey, I don't feel comfortable in my own body. I feel like I'm a girl. Like now that it's banned and they don't have the option in Tennessee to go down the rabbit hole or the trail of transgenderism, what do you think is the next like step in counseling to actually help a kid through gender dysphoria?
I mean, I appreciate that there's an effort being made to prevent this from happening to kids ever again, but we also need to address what happens after patients detransition, or if we're going to remove that option completely from these child patients, then we need to replace it with something else. And what that thing needs to be, I think, is psychotherapy. Because like I said, a lot of these patients have comorbid issues, a lot of traumas, often from abuse from a family member or like sexual abuse or assault. And they need real help. They don't need to be told that, yes, you are actually of the opposite sex. Yes, the problem is your own body and not the way that you feel about it. They need to be told that they're enough, that their body is not the issue, that they need to have their other problems worked out through, and they need to have a sense of community that doesn't just come from like an internet subculture or the transgender community. It needs to come from their family, from their peers, from say like clubs or sports or extracurriculars at school, and they need to be working towards something, especially as part of a team. That's one big thing that I was missing throughout a lot of my childhood that I was seeking.
Well, that really resembles like what you're talking about as far as what did you call it? The psychoevaluation, psychotherapy. There we go.
Psychotherapy, yes.
The solution you were offering sounds an awful lot like a Christian worldview. Isn't that funny? You were just talking about like you wish you had a belief structure growing up more than you did, and I don't know. I guess I don't really have a question. I just think that's an interesting comparison. It's like, hey, when it doesn't have to be like a mean religious whatever that the left thinks we're trying to push on our kids. It can just be like, hey, do this if you want to have a good life, and don't do this because you won't have as good of a life. So it's more like we're looking out for these kids.
Yeah.
And we want to raise them up in a good worldview.
We're giving them another option, the best option. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the time, the parents of these kids or the kids themselves are presented with this false dichotomy of there only being two choices. Either you transition or you're very likely going to die. But it's not that way. There's hope, and that's not a choice that they should feel like they have to make.
What do you think? What do you think is one positive thing that has come out of your story? Obviously, it invokes a lot of emotion. It's sad, rightfully so. But in over the past couple of years that you've come out with your story, what is like one really cool thing that has developed since starting to speak out about your story?
It's kind of hard to choose just one thing because there's a lot of good things that have come out of it. Like, I've gotten my fair share of like people threatening me or telling me that I'm wrong, that it was all my fault, that I should just leave this all to myself and stop putting my experience on the trans community or whatever they want to say about it. But I've gotten infinitely more support than I have any sort of hate or anything like that. And even for my transition, I think one thing that I can really appreciate about it is that I can sympathize with men a little bit more easily, especially like young men and a lot of their struggles. Like I used to think that like boys just had it better in every way and that the grass was greener on the other side, but it's difficult.
That's funny.
And it's not easy being a man. And I feel like in general we've kind of forgotten just how important men are. Both sexes are really in their natural role in the world. And we've kind of been pitted against each other. Like there's almost like a battle between the sexes about who's better. But really we're made different, but in a way we're equal. We just complement each other.
Well, yeah, I love that you touch on the fact that masculinity is really overlooked and demonized. Like why do you think masculinity is demonized in our society, in our post-Christian society, like in a secular atheist society? Why is masculinity? Because if we live in an atheist society, then atheism is all about just like whoever is the most powerful, it gets to be in charge, and that's like postured as like a good thing. And power is generally attributed to male attributes, like as being like strong and like really stubborn. And so, but why do you think masculinity is demonized in culture?
I think part of it is just kind of like the attempt to break down the roles of either sex in general. I mean, we've really downplayed the importance of masculinity in men and femininity in women.
Well, I think it's like to compare men and women is like, comparing an apple and an orange. Like they're equal, but they're two completely different entities.
Yeah, they're different.
Equal, but they're beautiful in their own ways, So to compare like the power of a man and the power of a woman, like they mean two very different things for either of the sexes. And they're meant to be that way. Like God created that for a reason. So, man, I think that's really cool. And you need for a society to function, you need the beautiful differences that come along with that. And it seems like the radical transgender left hates that because they hate the created order, because they see freedom as throwing off all rules, when in fact, like you've been saying, some rules are actually there to keep you safe, and there are parameters in place to actually help you thrive. But when you break those barriers, you're actually in bondage, which is like it's like a paradox. You do whatever you want, but that actually makes you enslaved. But if you do what you ought, you actually are free. So it's like a paradox. Well, controversy seems to follow you everywhere you go, and I'm sure it's very tempting to become discouraged or maybe unhappy or just burnt out sometimes, and like we all get. Is there where do you find peace in the midst of like your crazy life? What's like the one thing you can like just disconnect and settle down and feel at peace?
Yeah, I mean, it does get stressful at times, traveling so often and having to like be in a plane and airport all the time, all the waiting that comes with that, and then actually being at these events and like being on stage and having all these eyes on me and these ears listening to me. But there's still value in all of that, even if it causes me stress. I also try to take things slow when I can and just go out in nature, just go out on walks and see family and friends when I can, and just enjoy myself. And when I'm not working, I like doing illustration, mostly like character illustration. I also I'm starting to get a little bit into clothing design.
Oh, cool. Nice.
And I think one day I want to run my own brand.
That's really cool. Is it like what type of clothing? Is it just kind of a broad idea at this point, or have you sketched out clothes you'd like to make?
I have made a few concepts, but the idea is I think I want to go for something that's futuristic looking, with different substyles that are like based off of like different like internet subcultures, or some that are more like practical and more towards like I guess like being outdoors or working. And the idea kind of is like, I want to inspire a sense of hope for the future of the world. I mean, we always hear about how all these new technologies are scary and how awful the future is going to be. But I really don't think it's going to be all that bad. I mean, I think stuff like AI, we're going to be able to find ways to regulate it, but also use it in such a way that complements humanity rather than dominating it.
Interesting. That's really cool. So illustrations, art, like, you know, for me, I'm into music. Do you enjoy, what kind of music are you into?
I kind of have a broad taste in music. I listen to a little bit of everything, like 60s to maybe more like 70s to 90s pop, and some electronic stuff. A little bit of everything, really.
That's great. Well, I thought that was important to bring up those questions, just to get to know the Chloe that maybe not everybody gets to know. As we're wrapping up here, let's move. I think it's cool if we move to, like, you know, the conservatives themselves. Like, they want to know, they want to do the right thing. They love your story. They love you. They want to help you. But it can be scary. You know, like I said, controversy tends to follow you wherever you go. You know, you've got protesters at your events. That can be intimidating to a lot of conservatives who have that live and let live mentality, or don't want to stir up the nest. So, you know, when you have protests, you know, the left loves to name call. So when you have these protesters and they're name calling, it can be really frightening to decent people who obviously aren't, you know, racist or transphobes or sexist, but they get called these names. And obviously, I'm sure you've been called every name in the book. So,
oh yeah.
How would you, like, encourage the conservatives, the conservative movement, to be like, it's okay, you don't have to be controlled by this? What would you say to them?
If there's one thing that I've learned from being face to face with the opposition and a lot of these protesters, it's that almost 99% of the time, their bark is worse than their bite. They almost never do anything. And I mean, it's terrifying to go out there and have people screaming in your face and threatening your job, your family, whatever you have. Yeah. But I think this is an issue that everybody should be fighting for, because this is something that's it already is affecting thousands of families and children, and even entire institutions, like especially education and healthcare. And it's not something that we can stay quiet about anymore.
Well, thank you, Chloe, for this interview. This has been really fun.
Yeah.
Thank you to the audience for listening. And tomorrow, I mean, on the day that we're filming this, tomorrow we have our rally, Teens Against Gender Mutilation, that we'll be doing here on Cape Cod. You know, our mutual friend Hannah Faulkner from Tennessee, she did the same one. Now we wanted to invite you up here to Massachusetts, so we're really glad to have you, and we're excited to share your story with our community. And we want to get the word out. We want to, you know, speak truth into the culture, and you're helping us do that. So thanks so much.
And thank you.
And thank you guys all for tuning in. This is Chloe Cole, and I'm Sam Mealy with Turning Point USA on Cape Cod. God bless.